那 Zara 其实当然他是现在是这个纽西兰Govit Boyster 美术馆的馆长他虽然长期在各式各样的美术馆机构里面不管是担任首席策展人或者是馆长，或者是这样子的一个重要的国际展览的一个平台也就是他的前一份工作的地点就是澳洲的昆士兰美术馆Quagoma 的这一个在90年代初开始的这个亚太3年展的 Asia Pacific Triennial 的主要的一个策展整合就是一个 leading curator 的一个角色那事实上 Zara 本身也是一个非常资深而且努力耕耘的一个研究者特别是对纽西兰、澳洲的艺术家以及原民身份的艺术家的这样的一个研究，那本身也有非常多的一个著作那我跟 Zara 事实上就是在第9届亚太3年展2018年的时候认识的。那在今天的一开始的开场，其实我也提到17年、18年的这一个交接之际，也正是高美馆在转型，然后我们再开始思考，想把过往的这一个由台湾原住民艺术家的创作延伸到南岛语系的这样子一个连结，如何去松脱它、打开它，产生更多元、更多边的一个连结，想象的对话的可能性其实在那一个场合里面，也就是我跟 Zara 提到我们想要做泛南岛。事实上我记得2018年Zara 应该还记得在那个时候其实我还没想出泛这一个字，其实很长一段时间我们在美术馆的这个其实也是相对非常有机的动态的这样的一个讨论过程里面，很长一段时间我们都是用南岛以位在南方的这样的一个岛屿，可是这个南方已经不是地域的南方，而是某种文化的、政治的、经济的一个处境的一个南方那所以借由 Zara 也稍微连接到现在正在高美馆展出的这个泛南岛艺术季的这个部分。那接下来 Zara 的分享，除了他自己过往的这一些策展的经历，特别是亚太3年展，也是在90年代初算是现在我们在谈的这么多的这种跨区域的新的区域的去中心的发散的这样的一个国际展览的平台亚太3年展可以算是在那个时候的亚洲区域是非常的具有前瞻性的位置那另外一个具有前瞻性的位置，当然是在日本的亚洲福冈有这样的一个亚洲艺术的展览所以亚太3年展其实对整个我们这一个所谓的非西方中心的地区，其实都有非常特殊的意义那我想接下来 Zara 除了会跟我们分享他自己参与亚太3年展的历程，以及他自己在这个区域的这样的移动的一个观察，特别是整个台湾、纽西兰、澳洲这些年从90年代的这样子的一个交流的一个延续，然后同时也是刚才提到的在这个后疫情的时代里面这样子的他作为一个研究者，也是一个策展人这样的角色，当这样的一个全球移动变得不是那么的方便，随时都会有新的障碍出来的情况下，这样子的一个研究交流对话，除了线上之外，还有没有什么其他的一个想法？特别是当面对展览生产出来的时候，我们怎么样去体验到，或者是能够参与这个展览那所以接下来我们就把这一个时间交给Dr. Zara Stanhope 来跟我们分享他的策展的经历。谢谢。
I want to acknowledge that I'm talking to you from the land of Ngāti Te Whiti, the people of Ngāti Te Whiti here in Ngāmotu, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I'd also like to acknowledge all the Indigenous people who have joined us tonight as well. And to thank the partners who have organised this event for my invitation to participate. And greetings to Dr. Yulin Lee. And also fantastic to be talking alongside Alia Swastika and Adi as well. Fantastic presentations. I'm just going to share my screen. And my comments tonight are really maybe slightly more towards the comments that Yulin made towards the end of the introduction, because I was thinking about the idea of the topic of this panel, circling the spheres, but wondering at the moment, particularly in the context where I am in Aotearoa, New Zealand, where the borders are closed, that it feels very much like we are disconnected from other places, even from Australia where we can't travel at the moment. So I thought instead I might take a quick look back at some of the exhibitions and exchanges of contemporary art and artists between Taiwan and Australia and Aotearoa, particularly as they've developed since the 1990s. Because looking at those, I feel they've also often been one way and irregular, or maybe they're just slowly building to a sense of circulation, but this sense of circulation has been paused perhaps now. So I thought I'd consider the question of our direction of engagement now when the borders are closed, and maybe suggest that a focus on nurturing the roots of our art ecology is a useful strategy, thinking about how we can become more rhizomic while circulation or travel is not possible. A few key examples of exhibitions of contemporary art from Taiwan in Australia indicate that the reach of art presentations from Taiwan has been largely the main direction. Exhibitions have generally been enabled through financial support from that country or institutional partnerships between galleries and museums, or perhaps also just as frequently by individual artists or curators who've had the skills and administrative abilities to work with the granting bodies. One of the first visible projects of contemporary visual art from Taiwan was at Sydney's Museum of Contemporary Art in 1995. The exhibition Art Taiwan was curated by Yang Wenyi and Dr. Nicholas Jose and organised in collaboration with the Fine Art Museum. This exhibition included 30 artists, and Art Taiwan was promoted as an introduction to contemporary art from the country and its context in the early 1990s of new economic prosperity and political liberalisation, which really indicated the lack of general familiarity with recent Taiwanese art in Australia at the time. But there was certainly an appetite for seeing this art, even perhaps if it was little known, and the exhibition toured to 3 other Australian states. As Yulin mentioned, Queensland Art Gallery has, since 1993, been organising the Asia Pacific Triennial, an extensive exhibition of artists from across the region. And since its second iteration, APT2, in 1996, it's included artists from Taiwan. They've also been included in subsequent APTs in 2009, 2012, 2015 and 2018. And Queensland Art Gallery has developed the public's familiarity with contemporary Taiwanese art to audiences both in Brisbane and its many national and international visitors. And just to note in the company that we're in tonight too, that artists from Indonesia and Vietnam have been participating in that triennial since its first iteration in 1993. And as Adi knows, Ruang Grupa participated in APT7 in 2013. The Asia Pacific Triennial has functioned to build awareness and curatorial and research contacts within Taiwan across time and allowed publics to see recent art from Taiwan in the context of other art from across the region. Festivals and artist-led and curator-led projects have also been really important in creating the circulation of artists and art between Taiwan and Australia and reinforcing the plurality of artists and interests, as well as deepening connections across time. For example, in 1999, an exchange began between First Nation artists from Taiwan and Australia as part of the Yurumboy Festival in Melbourne and the Palima Festival in Taiwan, who were collaborating. This interaction then led to other artist collaborations. And it'd be interesting just to think also how many other interactions have happened subsequent to the events that have been organised, that have been initiated by participating artists. By contrast, at an academic level, individual Australian academic researchers and curators such as Sophie McIntyre and Olivia Krishna and others have published extensively in English on the development of contemporary art in Taiwan. They're also curators and have realised a number of exhibitions that deepen awareness of recent art from Taiwan in a national or regional context. As one example, first exhibited in 1909 at the Gold Coast City Art Gallery in Queensland and later in Sydney and in Aotearoa, New Zealand, McIntyre's face-to-face contemporary art from Taiwan presented over 30 works by 8 artists, which were noted as responding to changing economic and cultural values. More recently, McIntyre curated in Remix contemporary art from mainland China, Taiwan and Hong Kong, an exhibition of contemporary art that reimagined ink painting as a contemporary form of visual representation that connects past, present and future. Ink Remix was first presented in Sydney in 2015 and also, like some other exhibitions, seen across 3 Australian states in the next 2 years. And wayfaring photography in 1970s and 80s Taiwan, curated by Xu Jiangchen and Olivia Krishna, is at this moment currently on exhibition in Canberra, Australia. Comprising works primarily lent from the National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts, Taichung, the exhibition of 12 artist works argues for their diverse use of photography at the end of martial law. Artists have also invited Taiwanese artists through their own initiatives, often making contacts through residencies at Taipei's Artists Village or the Taidong Artist Residency. In addition, the artist-focused organisations in Australia and Aotearoa, such as Artspace, have regularly shown artists from Taiwan, as has Sydney's 4A Centre for Contemporary Asian Art. Taipei's Economic and Cultural Office has been proactive in enabling these manifestations of Taiwanese contemporary art over the past 2 decades. While Australia and Aotearoa have mostly stopped support for artists' international presentations due to the closed border situations during the COVID-19 pandemic, TICO continues its ongoing support for artists' visibility globally. A recent example of its breadth of support includes the Fringe Focus Taiwan in Melbourne's 2021 Fringe Festival, a program of experimental virtual reality art presented at a bar frequented by a youthful art public. Nevertheless, while the closing of borders has halted the movement of art and artists and creatives in some directions, there are many examples of working around these constraints to build on the histories of engagement. And as Yulin mentioned, the Pan-Austronesian Arts Festival is one of those. I'm sure COVID had an impact on Kaohsiung Museum's Pan-Austronesian Festival. However, the project was still realised and is currently on exhibition, as you know. This museum has a history of working with artists in the Pacific, including many from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and has wanted to push dialogue around the relationship of Taiwan and Pacific cultures with this project. It planned to bring artists from Australia and Aotearoa for this festival to Kaohsiung to collaborate and foster new engagements. For example, I was working with Camilla Roy Wiradjuri artist Jonathan Jones, who had hoped to make work with local Indigenous artists in South Taiwan. But of course, unfortunately, he wasn't able to travel. While this potential was unrealised due to the pandemic, preventing travel from beyond Taiwan, instead the museum has looked to reach out to audiences across the region by organising discussion programs online, such as this. There have been many such unrealised plans. In them lies the question of what could have been. What would the Western idea of the festival? Would the Western idea of the festival have been dismantled or changed if local and visiting artists had congregated and taken over the planning of this event in Kaohsiung, for example, just as Adi was talking about with Documenta. What has been lost with the pandemic conditions of the last 18 months, and what can be gained moving forward? At present, dialogue and exchange only stutters on in this part of the region. Our mode of engagement is generally relying on the convention of physical exhibitions which can travel themselves, and or online presentations that rely on the old model of the spectator having little agency in the experience. I'm equally implicated in this situation. This month, Australia's QUT University, with my institution, the Govett Brewster Art Gallery, and Taiwan's National Museum of Prehistory in Daidong, co-organised the online symposium Grounded in Place. This was a space over 3 days where 15 First Nation artists, curators and filmmakers, along with non-Indigenous scholars and museum professionals from the 3 countries, shared ideas and insights. It also brought some financial support for artists for their contributions at a difficult time. But I also asked myself, what else can we do? As Adi said, how do we think differently across new borders and inform our consciousness? Maybe by 2022, we'll be able again to welcome artists to each other's lands. The rising currency of Indigenous artists in Taiwan will be visible in the 10th Asia-Pacific Triennial, opening this December at Queensland Art Gallery, Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, in a project co-curated with Man Ray Siu and artist Yitan Pavavalang with the Taiwan People's Indigenous Cultural Development Centre. The project of ACE cross-generational Indigenous artists, including Bulane Paladian's work that you can see here, points to self-determination through the strength of collective consciousness relating to land, ecology and cosmology. Possibly, borders will open in time for face-to-face artist interactions and public engagement, opportunities that are such an important part of a project such as any triennial and biennale. This is the moment to take pause and reflect on how we can maintain energy across the whole sector of contemporary art, from artists and independent bodies to researchers and institutions and funders. For artists, earning a living has become even more precarious. And even where organisers have access to funding, there's a reliance on what can be presented rather than opportunities for what should still be considered necessities. Play, research, development, questioning, or reaching for new vocabularies. Maybe it's necessary, maybe what we're doing at the moment is necessary to survive, but will we survive well? I mentioned at the start the idea of nurturing the roots of an art ecology. Everyone knows that biological systems require healthy roots to survive and thrive. That's nothing new. But the basics like art and culture and their practitioners are often not top of mind at times like these. To survive well as an organisations or an ecology, we must not forget our role in amplifying or increasing advocacy for the value of the arts, their importance for artists' struggles for sovereignty, pride in identities and traditions, and nurturing well-being, so that artists and the cultural sector are not permanently damaged or unable to survive through neglect. To ensure that the arts or the foundations at the core of an ecology of art are looked after before all else. Secondly, we've been working together across borders for a long time. My examples just skim across the surface of a much bigger story. As important as remembering past connections, however, is the work of creating potential for the future. Opportunities won't occur unless we are ambitious in developing future expectations and planning now for exchanges and face-to-face engagement in coming years. Thirdly, let's be flexible and find new pathways. One of these can be to hand over power to artists and the curators, producers and others working with them, enable their voices in the situated place that they are in to grow and tell institutions what is wanted. Brooke Andrews' Biennale of Sydney, Niran in 2020, signposted this way of working, and Ruin Group organising Documenta similarly holds the promise as we look ahead. At my gallery, we've commenced plans to work with artists in Taiwan about what we can do, but we're having to think a couple of years in advance. We might become more rhizomic and healthy and sustainable as a regional art ecology together by empowering artists, their sovereignty and diversity, and embracing voices who weren't previously given space and bodies that were marginalised. The future is not pre-existing Western models, but delinking from institutional practices to listen to and be invited in by artists on their own terms. We'll be worthy neighbours and hosts if we can listen to artists elsewhere and at home about how they would like to grow their connections. Thank you.